She returned to his life and shattered his world to the core. Hello friends, my name is David, and every day I share new stories with you. I'll be glad if you subscribe and leave a comment. Chapter 1. An Ordinary Morning. The alarm went off at exactly 6:45. Michael didn't jump out of bed in panic, didn't grab his phone, didn't curse Monday. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the neighbor outside walking his dog. The soft click of claws on pavement, a muffled yawn, a short bark. Everything predictable. His mornings always followed the same script. The coffee machine, the scrape of the toothpaste, the rustle of his suit, the faint cologne he only used before work. Michael's life was structured like a spreadsheet. Tasks, deadlines, responsibilities. And in each column, the responsible one was always him. He stretched, got up, and looked in the mirror. Not old, not too young, a man who was holding it together, though every day the weight of time pressed a little heavier. He smirked faintly at his own reflection. "Let's go, champ." In the kitchen, the coffee machine hummed to life. The drip into the cup was the only sound connecting him to life outside the office. He hadn't read morning news for years. Too much noise, too little meaning. Silence or instrumental music suited him better. At work, he was considered reliable. The one who never missed deadlines, who calmed conflicts, whose suggestions were often accepted without debate. But with that reputation came the burden. Constant expectations. Don't fail, don't break, don't lose face. He laced up his leather Oxfords, grabbed his briefcase, old, black, its handle cracked, and left. In the elevator he ran into his neighbor, always carrying boxes and bags. Supposedly a freelance translator, though he looked more like a delivery man. Michael, as always, was the first to say, "Good morning." The drive to work was traffic-free, but gray and monotonous. Billboards advertising new condos, weary faces of passers-by, drivers sipping coffee from travel mugs without looking away from the road. In his car, Michael played the same business English audiobook again. Not because he hadn't understood it before, but because it was easier that way. Easier not to think. The office greeted him with cool air and the smell of paper. He turned on the lights, set his briefcase down, and sank into his chair with a quiet sigh. Not from exhaustion, but from the knowledge that another day was starting. Another day of being efficient. Though deep down he wanted, just once, to be himself. His screen filled with tasks. Report on Project Atlas, HR meeting at 11, KPI approval with marketing. All on schedule. Predictable. He closed the list and looked out the window. The sun was shining, a rare guest in his weekdays. A bold thought flickered. Shut it all down, disappear for a day, drive to that small cafe on the corner where the air smelled of cinnamon and no one knew his name. But 3 minutes later he was already typing an email. His assistant Emily knocked on the door. "Good morning. The boss asked you to come see him as soon as you arrived." "Something urgent?" Michael set the mouse aside. He didn't say, just right away. He straightened his tie, glanced at his reflection in the glass. Everything under control. He was still the man who kept his face steady, even if, inside, he was tired of holding it. But as he walked down the hallway, a strange feeling crept in. Not fear, not anxiety, more like anticipation. As if ahead was not a routine meeting, but something that could change everything. Of course, he didn't know that yet.
Chapter 2. The Unexpected Meeting. The door to the boss's office was slightly open. Michael knocked twice, firmly, and walked in. "You asked for me?" And froze. In the chair by the window sat a woman. Elegant, composed, her hair tied in a high ponytail. A light beige blazer. Calm, steady eyes. Rachel, the one. She raised her gaze to his. No surprise, no hesitation. Just a faint, almost invisible smile, the kind that always made him nervous. In a split second, the past crashed back into him. Their last night, the argument, her words, his silence, the door closing forever. "Michael, have a seat." The boss's voice pulled him back. He sat down, trying not to look at her, but he felt her gaze all the same. "We're entering a new phase with Project Vision 24, the boss said. The board decided to bring in an outside communications consultant. This is Rachel Anderson. Starting today, she'll be working with your department." She nodded. "Good morning, Michael. It's good to see you." The voice. The same. Warm. Steady. "Likewise," he muttered. The boss continued. "Rachel was recommended by headquarters. She has experience with team transformation and process optimization. Your task is collaboration. Personal history has nothing to do with it. This is business." "Understood," Michael said sharply, and for the first time looked straight into her eyes. Inside, though, a storm was raging. Their eyes met. And in that brief duel, there was no past. Only restraint. Silence. "That's all for now. You may go. Rachel will stay. We'll discuss the details," the boss said. Michael stood up a little too quickly. He realized it the moment he grabbed his briefcase. "See you later," he said, pausing for a second. "Of course," Rachel replied, without a trace of irony. He stepped out, closing the door behind him. For a few seconds, he just stood in the hallway, staring at nothing. Then he exhaled. Deep. Slow. Like after the tension of a public speech. Only here, there were no applause. Just the realization. The past hadn't stayed in the past. It was now sitting across the table in the boardroom. Chapter 3. Memories Behind Glass. The office buzzed with its usual sounds. Keyboards clicking, the hum of the air conditioning, clinking mugs in the break room. Michael walked past a conference room where a meeting was underway, nodding automatically to a colleague, as if nothing had happened. Outwardly, nothing had. Inside, it felt as if a sealed box had been pried open. In his office, he paused at the window. In the glass, his reflection stared back, composed, strict, exactly how people expected him to look. But beside that reflection, it was as if she stood there too, slightly to the side, like she used to, when she would rest her hand on his shoulder from behind. He still felt that touch, not on his skin, but in his memory. He sat down, opened his laptop. The screen filled with KPI tables, routine, but the numbers blurred. They made no sense. He tried to distract himself, answered emails, checked the weekly plan, made a few calls. His voice sounded steady, even upbeat. No one would guess that at the same time, his heart pounded in his ears. The calls didn't help. He rose, walked over to the shelf. On the bottom sat a plastic case, an old USB drive. He rarely opened it, kept it either as a reminder or as a warning. Click. Folder, Summer 2020. Photos, notes, documents. One file called Draft Letter. A letter he had written that night but never sent. He opened it. "I don't know if it was you who hurt me or me who hurt you. Maybe we just didn't match in time. Maybe you left because I became too rigid, too closed off. Or maybe because you always needed freedom, and with me, you couldn't find it. I don't blame you. I'm just sorry. Sorry we became strangers. Though maybe we were never truly close to begin with." He closed the file. Didn't delete it. Just shut off the screen. Through the glass wall of his office, he saw Rachel's silhouette. She was speaking with the legal director, tilting her head slightly, the old gesture she always made when she listened intently. But now she was different. Not the Rachel who once left behind an empty apartment and a coffee cup on his desk. Now she was a professional, collected, distant. And yet, something inside him clenched, like an old scar that doesn't hurt, but aches when the weather changes. He stepped out to grab coffee, made small talk with a colleague about the rain, about reports, everything ordinary, everything correct. But inside, the low hum remained. Back in his office, he closed his eyes for a minute. And in that minute, he heard her voice again, the real one, the one from home. I can't do this. You've got everything in order, but I need something alive, just one day without a plan. He saw it clearly. Summer heat, the smell of linden trees through the open window, her barefoot in his old shirt on the kitchen floor. You're living with a calendar, Michael, not with me. And back then, he had said nothing. Not because he didn't understand, but because without structure, he felt the ground slip from under his feet. A knock at the door. Michael, meeting in 10 minutes, Emily reminded. I'll be there. He straightened up, put his calm mask back on. Everything under control. On the outside. Inside, the storm was just beginning.
Chapter 4. First Contact. When Rachel entered, the door made no sound, only the soft click of her heels. Michael looked up from his monitor. He expected to see anyone, a courier, his assistant, even the janitor, but not her. Sorry, do you have a couple of minutes? Her voice was soft, professional. She carried a slim folder and a notebook. Of course, come in. He stood, gestured toward the chair. She sat across from him, keeping her distance, opened the folder and went straight to the point. I've already reviewed the department's structure, but before the formal part, I'd like to hear from you. Where do you see the main weak points? If you could change 3 things without limits, what would they be? Michael studied her face. Her voice carried no irony, no provocation, only focus. She spoke as if he were just another project stakeholder. I'd cut the overlap between logistics and procurement, he began. Simplify reporting, and give more autonomy to senior specialists. We waste too much time on endless approvals. She nodded, jotting notes. That aligns with my own observations, especially about autonomy. It's clear you're used to taking responsibility. The others seem to rely on your decisions, even in the smallest things. He gave a faint smile. Or maybe they're just afraid of making mistakes. Rachel looked at him with a half smile. The same one he remembered from the days when she tried to soften him after long, difficult hours at work. Or maybe they've simply gotten too used to you controlling everything. That's not always a bad thing, she noted. Are you saying this as a consultant or as someone who knew me for 3 years? A pause. Long enough to feel heavy. As a consultant, she replied, evenly. We're not here for the past. You and I, we are part of a process. He nodded, but something inside him stirred. She had switched into cold professional mode faster than he expected. Fine, he said. I'm all for being constructive. I'll cooperate. Perfect. I'll need to run brief interviews with key team members. If you expect resistance, let me know. There will be resistance, but I'll handle it. She jotted down another note, closed the folder, and stood up. Then I won't keep you. We'll see each other again. She turned to leave, and without looking back, said, You haven't changed. In a good way. He caught himself watching her walk away. There was something familiar in her movement. Not in her figure, but in the rhythm. He remembered the way she used to move around his apartment, carrying 2 mugs of tea, tucking her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. It all came back uninvited, like a scent from the past you don't notice until you open the drawer where it's been trapped. When the door closed behind her, he sank into his chair.
Rachel was now inside his system, yet further away than ever. Not an ex, not someone who had returned, not someone waiting for a second chance. She had become part of his work. And that was the most unsettling thing of all.
Chapter 5. Colleagues sense it. By lunchtime, the office was humming with its usual rhythm. Someone argued in a conference room, someone ate a sandwich at their desk, someone hurried down the hallway with a stack of papers. Everything ran like a well-oiled machine. But that day, the machine faltered, just slightly, barely noticeable, but all the more striking. Michael was acting different. No colleague could pinpoint exactly what was off. He still worked, replied, assigned tasks, but he paused more often, stared out the window longer than usual. At one point, instead of correcting a table, he simply closed it and froze, his hand still resting on the mouse, as if he had forgotten why he'd opened it. Emily, his assistant, was the first to notice. After years of working side by side, she could read his state from the way he said, "Good morning." Today, it had been too flat, too even, like there was no person behind it. "Everything okay?" she asked, stepping in with a cup of coffee. Michael looked up. "Why wouldn't it be?" "You just seem distracted. You didn't even complain about the logistics report, and it's a mess again." He smirked faintly. "Maybe I'm practicing patience today." Emily studied him carefully. She didn't press, but she made a mental note. Something was going on. By mid-afternoon, whispers began drifting across the floor. Someone mentioned that the new hire had been talking with Michael by the coffee machine. Someone else noticed the way he looked at her. Another speculated that she might be an ex. "Wouldn't surprise me," said Mark from Analytics, scratching his beard. "Either they worked together before, or, you know." "Michael?" Susan scoffed. "He's got all work, no feelings written on his forehead." "That's exactly why it's strange," Mark replied. "Something's shifted." Rumors in an office always spread faster than official memos, and while no one dared ask Michael directly, the tension was obvious. He felt it too. It irritated him, the way people tried to read him, the glances that lingered a little too long, the thin veil of unspoken assumptions. But most of all, he was unsettled by himself. His head lived in one time, his body in another. After lunch, he slipped into a meeting room where Rachel was presenting a plan for a new motivation system. A handful of employees listened attentively, taking notes. He sat down with his notebook as well, but he didn't write. He just watched. She spoke with ease, confidence, about engagement, about trust, about team connections. Everything made sense, and yet everything stirred in him an odd sense of jealousy. He didn't hear the nuances of her points. He only heard her voice, and remembered how she once told him, "People aren't rows in a spreadsheet." As if echoing his thought, one of the employees chuckled. "Michael, you and Rachel were sitting there in perfect silence, like you're telepathically in sync." A ripple of laughter spread across the room. Michael lifted his head calmly. "Sometimes listening is more useful than speaking." The laughter faded, but the tension lingered. He knew it would only get harder to keep his distance. The past, however deeply buried, was seeping back into the present like water through a crack. Chapter 6. Old Wounds. After 6, the office began to empty. Some hurried home to their kids, others to the gym, others simply wanted to catch the train before rush hour. Michael stayed. Not because he had to, but because he didn't know where else to hide from the stares. He closed his task calendar, turned off notifications, but he couldn't silence the feeling that the ground beneath him was starting to shift, tiny fractures in the foundation. And it wasn't just because Rachel was back.
It was because everyone else had started to notice. He recalled the midday meeting. Ordinary MF. Projects, deadlines, coordination. Until one of the junior analysts cracked a joke. "Michael, you and Rachel were so synchronized in your silence, I swear I thought you were telepathic." Nervous laughter. Standard office humor. If not for her reaction, Rachel didn't laugh. She only raised her brows slightly, as if she didn't get it, or pretended not to. And Michael stiffened, shoulders tightened, his eyes lingered on the screen a beat too long. After that, his thoughts shifted, not about her anymore, about himself. She could endure. Cold, professional, composed. She knew how to keep her face steady. But he couldn't allow himself weakness. Not here, not now. He had built this department for years. His reputation, the trust of his colleagues, his authority, all rested on one principle. Michael doesn't mix the personal with the professional. He's the head, not the heart. And suddenly, rumors, jokes, half smiles in the hallways. He knew how corporate environments worked. One wrong move, and everything you've built becomes gossip fodder at the coffee station. If anyone decided there was something between him and Rachel, or worse, that there still was, it wouldn't just hit him as a man, it would strike at him as a system. He poured himself a glass of water, drank, exhaled. The solution? Work. Distant, precise, documented. He even opened his notebook and began to write.
1. Put interaction with Rachel as a separate item on the agenda. 2. Redistribute initiatives within the team to minimize overlap. 3. Move discussions into written form, corporate platform only. 4. Eliminate one-on-one meetings. Step by step. A strategy of distance. Surgical. Without blame. Without personal. He almost felt in control again, building a wall between himself and the past. But he didn't know. One floor below, something was happening that would shatter that wall before it was ever complete. Rachel sat in the HR office. She was reviewing the company's old communication channels, archives of management discussions, structures, reports, routine consultant work. She clicked calmly through files until she opened a folder. Internal chat, management, 2020. Hundreds of messages. The archive had never been cleaned. And then she saw it. Michael. Who would have thought that the person you share a bed with could turn out to be the most unpredictable element in the company? I guess it's time to revise how I assess risks, in business and in life. She reread it. The date, 3 days after she had left. Her fingers froze on the mouse. Her breath grew quieter. Slowly, she leaned back in her chair. It wasn't an insult, not a complaint, but it was a verdict. Not a shout, but a cold statement. She was a glitch, a flaw in the system, a threat to balance. And he hadn't written it to a friend, not in a private chat, but in a space colleagues could and did see. Back then, no one knew who it was about, but he knew, and now she did too. Rachel closed the folder, stood, walked across the room, stopped at the window. The feeling she had long sealed off returned. Not anger, not resentment, but a faint burning in her chest. He hadn't just forgotten. He had classified her. To him, she was a case, a precedent, an error. That evening she didn't write a word, didn't say anything. But starting the next day, her tone grew colder, her detachment sharper. Every word edged just slightly. Not out of revenge,
but because something inside had cracked.
Chapter 7. A Chance Conversation. The next morning, Rachel arrived a little earlier than usual. Not enough to draw notice, but enough to be in the office before Michael. She sat in the conference room, reviewing documents, making notes. Her face calm, collected. But inside, the ground felt as if it were shifting beneath her, millimeter by millimeter. Michael appeared at 9:14, 3 minutes later than usual. He stepped out of the elevator, greeted reception, and headed for his office. At the door, Rachel, standing quietly with a cup of tea. "Morning," she said, as if nothing had happened. "Good morning." He nodded, a little stiffly. "I've got a few points on the Core 2.0 project. Better to go over them now before the day gets busy. Got 5 minutes?" He gestured toward the office. "Come in." The door closed. 2 people. An open silence. Rachel began. "I've reviewed the structure around Core. Some processes hinge on manual approvals. That slows everything down. I'd suggest redistributing the coordinator roles. We're working off the 2022 model. It's proven. To a point, but at critical junctions, it stalls." Michael leaned forward. "Your job is to implement recommendations, not rewrite architecture." "I'm not rewriting, I'm adjusting. Not from a place of power, from a place of necessity." He didn't look away. "Are you sure this isn't the past talking? And are you sure you don't have a past?" She said it calmly, almost casually. But in her eyes, a cold fire flickered. "I work here, Rachel. You're an outside consultant. Don't forget that. And you're an internal process resisting change. Don't forget that either." His lips tightened. He wanted to fire back, sharply, but restrained himself. "Fine, let's get to specifics." She laid out a diagram, clear, logical, without emotion. Everything she said made sense. The problem wasn't the proposal, it was the person making it. He closed the file. "Fine, we'll bring it up in the team meeting. Already scheduled. I booked a 2:00 slot with Lydia." His brow arched. "Without notice? It's an open schedule. You're not opposed, are you?" Formally, he wasn't, but he felt the ground shifting again. She was playing by the rules, and still undermining his footing. Rachel stood. "See you in the meeting room. Thanks for your time." "You're welcome." When the door closed, Michael sank into his chair and exhaled. He could feel it. Control was slipping away. Worse, authority was slipping away. In his department, where for years he had been the unquestioned anchor, a new axis was forming. And it turned, with her calm smile and the shadow of an unwelcome past. Meeting, 2 p.m., conference room. Michael entered with one intention: to control the discussion. He knew the arguments, knew the counters, but he didn't know that Rachel had prepared not only a presentation, but also a surprise. "Before I begin," she said, "I'd like to show a case from another company. Very similar structure, same issues. And right now, joining us is their lead project architect, David Henderson." On the screen appeared a confident, charismatic man in his 40s. "Good afternoon. I don't know Michael personally, but I've heard a lot of good things. Rachel told me about the key role he plays in your project." Michael stiffened. Rachel had been discussing his role with an outsider? David, could you briefly explain how your team resolved the conflict between manual approvals and distributed management? She asked. And David spoke, clear, backed with numbers, charts, and his words confirmed exactly what Rachel had been proposing. The room fell into silent acknowledgement. Her approach carried weight. Michael listened as though someone were methodically stripping away his armor. Thank you, David, Rachel concluded. I think it will be easier now to discuss our next steps. Michael raised his hand. I need to make a point. If we validate every issue externally, we lose manageability. This isn't an international forum, it's a workplace. Rachel nodded. Then perhaps it's time to reconsider what kind of workplace we have if it's become impermeable. From that moment, the meeting shifted. For the first time, some employees looked at Rachel not just as a consultant, but as someone who could change things. And at Michael, as someone who might simply be holding on to the old. After the meeting, he walked down the hallway alone, one thought pounding in his head. She planned this. She made it public. She's not here to collaborate. She's here to take control. And then, on his phone, a notification popped up. Unauthorized access to file. draft_protocol_may_final.pdf. User r.anderson@corp. He froze. Opened the system. It was his personal draft, not secret, but not meant for external users. Clearly, he had forgotten to revoke access when copying drafts to the company cloud. The file was dull. Notes for a presentation, raw report structure. But at the bottom lingered one unformatted paragraph, typed late one evening, left behind. Sometimes I think she was the only one that ever felt real. Like maybe I was wrong back then, but at least I felt something. Now I'm not wrong, but I don't feel anything. He stared at the screen with a blank face. It wasn't a confession, not a declaration of love. More like the weary confession of a man who never intended anyone to read it. And now, someone had. He shut the laptop. Rachel knew. Now, for certain. Not because he had told her, but because he had slipped. And for Michael, that was the most unbearable part. Chapter 8. Under Pressure. The morning hit hard. Gray sky, heavy rain, a crowded lobby dripping with umbrellas. The whole office seemed soaked through. Employees sat at their desks with damp hair, umbrellas stuffed into bins, tired eyes. Michael walked in briskly, not greeting security. Not out of rudeness, but because his thoughts outran his words. All morning he felt a pulse of unease. Not panic, but not calm either. He didn't know if Rachel had read that paragraph. Maybe she had, maybe not. But now, in every look she gave, he saw something different. Not judgment, not sympathy, complexity. As if she was seeing not just the professional, but the man, the one who had stumbled, if only for a moment. She behaved flawlessly, perhaps too flawlessly. But each time their eyes met, in the hall, in the elevator, in the meeting room, something unspoken passed between them. Not dialogue, not admission, just the echo of what had never been said. He forced himself into routine, assigned tasks, replied in the corporate chat, even joked with Emily about the vending machine coffee.
Everything looked almost the same. Almost. That day, at the internal briefing, something happened he hadn't expected. The topic: optimizing logistics processes. Rachel had prepared a new draft, all within scope. But suddenly, Steve, head of procurement, one of Michael's longtime allies, cautious and steady, spoke up.
Colleagues, I'd like to support Rachel's approach. We checked her numbers. In the last 2 weeks, errors in communication between our departments dropped by 40%. That's more than in the entire previous quarter. I think we should continue in this direction. Michael didn't respond immediately. He had expected neutrality, or at least soft phrasing, but he got direct support for her model. It felt almost like betrayal. "Thank you, Steve," Rachel said. She didn't even look at Michael.
A cold wave rose inside him. Not anger, not jealousy. Threat. The threat of losing his footing. Later, in the hallway, he approached Steve. "Didn't think you'd throw your weight behind her model so quickly. You've always been the cautious one." Steve shrugged. "I still am, but numbers don't lie. And honestly, the atmosphere has shifted. People feel heard now, not just directed." Michael understood. The conversation was over. Arguing was pointless, because this was no longer about decisions. It was about influence. Rachel had shifted the center of gravity, without force, without conflict. She had simply become the point of trust. And he was no longer always the one they turned to first. The whole day passed in a state of subtle overload. Michael worked on autopilot, signing, approving, correcting, but his thoughts drifted. Every move Rachel made now felt like a challenge. Even when she simply walked down the hall with her tablet, he felt it as a test of his stability. And in the evening, when the office was nearly empty, he sat in silence. In the window, his reflection, tired, slouched, aged a week in a day. Papers piled on his desk, a cup of cold coffee beside them. He hit send in the company chat and closed his laptop. Silence. He stood, paced, wandered into the open space. And then he heard two women's voices from behind a partition. "Did you see how she talks to him? Like he works for her." "Yeah, and he's on edge. That's not like him. Michael always kept his distance." "Maybe they were together before. There's way too much tension." "Exactly. She looks at him like she knows something about him the rest of us don't." A pause. Then a whisper. "Maybe she didn't come here for the project at all. Maybe she came here to take Michael apart." He didn't wait to hear more. Returned to his office. Closed the door. One thought in his head. He no longer controlled the situation, and that was dangerous. The next day, the twist hit. A message from the director. "Tomorrow at 11, there will be a meeting with Rachel. Headquarters wants you present. The discussion will cover an extended contract for her participation in long-term transformation processes. Prepare remarks and suggestions." Michael read it twice, closed it. Rachel was staying, not as a temporary consultant, as part of the future, as if she hadn't just been brought back into the office, but woven into his reality.
Chapter 9. Counter-Strike. Michael didn't sleep that night. He replayed the meeting in his head over and over, like scenes from a courtroom drama where he was the accused with no lawyer. Steve's words. The department's support. Rachel's smile. Not triumphant, no. Worse. Assured. As if everything was unfolding according to plan. But if she could play the long game, then so could he. The next morning, he arrived early, locked himself in his office and began mapping.
Who among his people was still firmly with him, who wavered, and who was clearly drifting toward Rachel. He didn't need to write down names. He knew them. Emily, unquestionably loyal. Rob from IT, probably with him, but cautious. Anna, on the fence, but he knew how to persuade her. Structure, logic, career prospects. Steve, he struck from the equation. No longer reliable. At 10, he gathered 3 of them, Emily, Anna, and Rob, in a small conference room. Handed out printouts, sketched a plan to strengthen internal motivation. It looked like an initiative, not a fight with Rachel, but an improvement of the existing system. Professional, tactical, without personal undertones. "We need stronger internal mechanisms," he said. "External expertise has its place, but we can't allow the process to lose control. I'm proposing an internal hub. Every department runs parallel analytics with final validation through me." Emily nodded. Anna took notes. Rob, as always, asked technical questions, more out of respect than doubt. "And who will coordinate this?" Anna asked. "You, if you agree. It would give you independence in the structure and a path for growth." She didn't answer right away, but he saw she was considering it, not opposed, just weighing. "Then let's fix it. Pilot starts within a week. And please, keep the discussion internal, no noise." It looked like a strategy, but he knew it was defense, a wall against Rachel. Polite, elegant, but a wall nonetheless. At lunch, he overheard Rob by the coffee machine. No, it's not anti-Rachel. He really does want to preserve the structure. He's just afraid her model will make him not central. Michael walked past without a glance, but he heard and understood. They were reading him. His moves no longer seen as leadership. They were seen as defense, and defense is always weakness. That same day, around 5, a call came from Paul at headquarters, an old contact, formerly part of the transformation department. "Mike, listen, one thing. There's a restructuring project on the agenda. Might affect your team. Nothing final yet, but..." "Restructuring?" "Yeah, some redistribution of responsibilities. Rachel will be one of the coordinators in the pilot. If you want, send in your own proposals. Don't just defend, shape the narrative. You follow me?" "I follow," Michael said. After the call, he sat staring at the wall. Something was shifting, not just in his department, higher. And Rachel, she wasn't just an outside consultant anymore. She was becoming part of the new framework being built around him. He realized a single counterstrike wouldn't save him. This was already a multi-level game. And he wasn't used to playing blind. Chapter 10. A Heart to Heart. He didn't want this conversation. He knew. The further he kept from her, the easier it was to hold the boundaries. But after his failed initiative, after Steve's words, after the call from headquarters, silence was no longer safe. It looked like weakness or surrender. And the worst part, he no longer understood. What was she really doing here? The official reasons sounded perfect: contract, optimization, external expertise. But in every word she spoke, every glance, there was the sense she knew more than she let on, and that she was moving not by protocol, but by her own carefully laid out route. He sent her a short message. "Got about 15 minutes tonight. If it works, let's talk, informally." The reply came quickly. "Sure, No protocol. They met in a small cafe near the office. No ties, no laptops, just two people at a table. Rachel arrived first, in a black turtleneck, her face tired but composed. No makeup, a warm cup in her hands. When Michael came in, she simply gave him a short nod. "Thanks for agreeing," he said. "You asked. I don't refuse polite conversations," she answered, without irony. He didn't circle around. "I don't understand why you're embedding yourself so deeply. You could have just finished the contract and left, but now you're practically part of the team, as if this is more than a project." She calmly set her cup down. "And you think I'm doing this because of you?" He didn't answer right away, just looked at her closely. "I think you knew you'd end up here, and that it wasn't by chance." Rachel turned her gaze toward the window, where evening traffic crept by. "You're right. I knew. It was a deliberate choice. But not to come back, and not to interfere in your life. I came because, despite everything, you're the one whose system I understand best. You understand me? Or you want to control me? I don't control. I observe. And yes, I'm here not only for the project, but not because you owe me anything." He tensed. "Then why?" She drew a slow breath. "People rarely return to places where they were happy. More often, to places where questions remain. And I still have questions. Until I understand why it all fell apart back then, I can't move forward." He clenched his fingers. "And if you never understand? Then it'll be too late," she said quietly. "Why? Because you've changed, and I have too. And two people don't just align by accident twice, even if they want to." Silence fell between them, too heavy to break with a phrase. Rachel glanced at her watch. "I should go. Thanks for the tea." She stood, smiled, not like a goodbye, but almost like a friend, and laughed. He stayed, in the kind of silence that was unbearable, not because nothing happened in it, but because everything could be felt behind it. The next morning, Rachel arrived at the office as usual, calm, focused, professional. But before noon, she made a call. "Good afternoon. This is Rachel Anderson. I'd like to add a proposal to the board agenda to consider shifting part of the management processes under my external oversight in pilot format." She hung up, sat back down, and kept reading her report. It wasn't a strike, not an attack. It was a new move. Chapter 11. Point of Tension. The meeting in the conference room began like any other. Agenda on the screen, the air filled with coffee, fatigue, and unopened calendars. Colleagues sat in their usual patterns. Near the exit, those hoping to slip out early. In the center, those eager to show engagement. Michael took his seat at the table. Beside him, Anna and Steve. A little further, Rachel, composed with her tablet and a slim folder of documents. The routine items came first, one after another. Michael answered crisply, precisely. Everything under control. Until the development deputy announced, "Next item, initiative to redistribute some internal management processes within the pilot project for flexible oversight. Presenter, Rachel Anderson." The room grew quieter. Rachel stood, stepped to the screen. The slide read, "Reframing departmental links, new principles of oversight." She spoke calmly, clearly, confidently. "In this pilot, I'm not proposing replacement, but supplementation of the current structure. The idea is a temporary transfer of certain cross-department communication functions to external coordination in order to reduce errors, increase adaptability, and ease the load on a single management center. Michael felt his chest tighten. The principle is not suppressing hierarchy, but decompressing it. Employees will be able to make decisions faster and all moderate cross-team interactions without touching strategy. She emphasized, "This is not a redistribution of power, but of attention." Her eyes swept the room, and then to Michael. He rose, not sharply, but with a weight in his tone that everyone could hear. "Allow me to clarify. This model effectively places processes under external oversight that I am directly accountable for. That's highly irregular, and I don't see who bears responsibility if the system fails." Rachel nodded slightly. Responsibility is shared. In the pilot, each moderator is accountable for their own zone. It's written into the model. Documentation is in the appendix. So employees would report to 2 coordinators at once, or temporarily to just 1. They don't need to report. They need to work. An overseer is not a manager. That's an important distinction. A few heads in the room nodded. The rest? Silent. Michael paused. Then, more firmly. A system where it's unclear who makes the final decisions isn't flexibility. It's diluted accountability. I can't support something that, in the long run, creates a leadership vacuum. Rachel's gaze was steady, almost emotionless. Maybe you and I just have different definitions of the word flexibility. He wanted to respond, badly. But he noticed the room wasn't looking for his words. Not support, not opposition. They were waiting for the outcome. What will Michael do? Yield? Break? Push back head-on? He stepped back, sat down. "I've stated my position. I'll submit formal objections in writing." The meeting went on, but no one was really listening to him anymore. 2 hours later, an email, a summons to the director's office. He entered, collected as always. But inside, he already knew something would be wrong. "Michael," the director began, "I'll be blunt. Your stance on Rachel is clear, but we've received recommendations from headquarters. They support her involvement. And moreover, they've approved extending the pilot into the next quarter." Michael nodded. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means you're staying, of course, but your area will be adapted, temporarily. You need to be inside the process, not against it." "I'm against chaos, not against the process." "Then prove it. Work with her, not beside her. With her, if you can. It'll serve you better in the end." He left the office without a word. That evening, he didn't go home. He sat in his office, staring at a blank monitor. Now he knew. He had lost the first round. Formally, not fired, not demoted. But his center of gravity had been shifted. He was no longer the anchor. And the woman sitting in another wing of the building was now part of the system, and she would have to be reckoned with. Chapter 12. Beneath the Surface. For the next 2 days, Michael held himself in perfect control. He didn't argue, didn't speak first, didn't call meetings. Outwardly, calm. Inwardly, a shift. He started asking himself questions he'd long avoided. Why am I clinging to this structure? Am I really fighting for results, or just to remain the sole decision maker? And what if Rachel is right? What if this isn't destruction, but a new kind of breath I just don't know how to take? That evening, he sat alone in the conference room, staring at a whiteboard full of diagrams. And suddenly, he remembered a summer when they were together, their strangest argument, in a park, over something trivial. She wanted to veer off the path, he didn't. Back then, she said, "Sometimes, if you stay on the path too long, you end up in a dead end, without even noticing where you should have turned." He'd brushed it off then, but now it sounded different. Maybe this was the turn. The next morning, he found a reason to linger by the coffee machine just as Rachel arrived. Not by accident, but not entirely deliberate either, as if he'd steered himself there. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she nodded. He poured coffee. Words slipped out. "You remember, I was always impossible to wake up." Rachel raised a brow slightly. "And you remember how I dragged you out at 5 a.m. to drive to the lake? Took me 3 tries before you gave in." They smiled, the first genuine smile between them in all this time. "I haven't grown softer," he said, "but I've realized rigidity doesn't always take you where you want to go." "Sometimes it doesn't take you anywhere at all," she replied calmly. "Do you regret being here now?" "No." "Because now you're winning?" She looked him in the eye. "Because now I know I don't want to win. I want to do what's right, even if it hurts." He fell silent. It wasn't peace, not even a truce, but for the first time since all this began, it wasn't war. But the day was just beginning. After lunch, he was summoned again. This time, the tone was different. Not harsh, but unsettling. "Michael, we've received a notice from compliance. An internal review has been initiated on a case you were involved in as an advisor 3 years ago. Regional contract. Do you remember?" Michael froze. He remembered. A complex project in Portland. One contractor turned out to have ties to shady dealings. He'd stepped away in time. Everything had been legally clean. The rumors had flared and died quickly. Why now? "We don't know, but it's an anonymous complaint, and it has details only someone close at the time could have known." "You think?" He didn't finish. "I don't think anything, but I want you prepared. With all the changes and restructuring, the last thing we need is a hanging thread." Leaving the director's office, Michael didn't walk. He moved in silence. And in that silence lay the truth. Someone was digging into his past. Not because the system had demanded it, but because someone had written their own script. He didn't know who, but he knew one thing. This was no longer just the story of 2 people. This was a story where other interests had begun to weave in. And if before he had fought to protect his face, now it was his back. Because that was where someone was aiming. Chapter 13. The One in the Shadows. After the meeting with the director, Michael went back to his office and tried to recall who had been around during that Portland project. Who could have known the details mentioned in the complaint? It was 2020, a hot, grueling year of brutal deadlines. Back then, he hadn't yet been a department head. Back then, he still doubted himself and the system. And suddenly, he remembered David Miller, a mid-level manager assigned under Michael as coordinator for contractors. A solid worker, but hungry for promotion. After the project, he was moved to another division, later out to a branch on the outskirts. 6 months ago, he returned, and now he was in internal audit. Michael pulled up the internal database. Miller's name was all over the compliance correspondence. He wasn't the filer, but it looked like he'd been tasked with the review. Coincidence? That evening, in the parking lot, they ran into each other face to face. Miller had a coffee in hand, smiling, self-assured. "Michael, good to see you again." "David, heard you're in audits now?" "Yeah, came back. Things are running hot here, so I figured I'd help cool the system down a bit." The words were casual, but the eyes, cold. Michael understood everything. This wasn't just an audit, it was an attempt to push him out, quietly, by planting doubt, by staining his reputation, using other people's hands. Rachel didn't hear about it from Michael. She heard from the deputy director, who mentioned offhand. "Anderson, by the way, you might get some copies on an internal matter, something about Michael, unofficial. Likely nothing, but since you're in coordination now, better you know." She said nothing, but half an hour later, she sent an email to legal. Requesting a meeting on case number 74-PTL, I've identified contradictions in the interpretation of facts that could affect the reputation of senior management, ready to present arguments in person. Rachel never explained anything to Michael, never brought it up. She simply came into the staff meeting and said, in front of everyone, "On case number 74, I've submitted an official opinion. The review lacks sufficient basis. Let's focus on current tasks instead of getting distracted by speculation." The words were even, professional, but the whole room understood. She had covered for him, not as a friend, as a colleague, the way people do when they know the price of reputation. Michael said nothing, just nodded. Later in the hall, he caught up with her. "Thank you." She looked at him steadily. "I wasn't saving you. I was protecting the project. You're part of it. Simple as that." And she walked on. But to him, it wasn't just a gesture. It was a line. After that moment, he no longer saw her as an adversary. Chapter 14. A New Axis. The next day, Michael did something no one expected. At the morning meeting, he handed the floor to Rachel himself. "Rachel has a proposal on streamlining approval schedules. Let's listen carefully. I think it could benefit everyone." No one joked. No one exchanged glances. Because in his voice there was no coercion, only readiness. Rachel presented her idea briefly, without push, without show, just like someone who had earned trust. And now that trust was mutual. A week later, a crisis hit. A supplier pulled out of an equipment delivery at the last minute. The senior manager panicked. The team froze. In the past, Michael would have taken full control, lined everyone up, given instructions, monitored every detail. But now he said instead, "Whoever has an alternative, speak up. We've got 30 minutes." And for the first time in a long while, people spoke. Without fear, without hesitation. Anna, the same Anna who had once wavered between camps, gave the solution. And it worked. When it was over, Michael walked over to Rachel and simply said, "I'm not building fortresses anymore. We're building bridges." Rachel nodded. That's the future. He had once believed strength lay in control, in spreadsheets, instructions, responsibility locked in his hands. Now he understood strength was in trust, in knowing when to step back because someone else saw further, in listening, not commanding but hearing, and most of all, in not winning at all costs but staying human, even when everything was on the line.